Frederica and Petra's maid days that day, Frederica Baumann was terribly bewildered. Long, shimmering blonde hair and bright jade eyes like gemstones, tall for a woman, and limbs that, while slender, were well exercised. With that body wrapped in a tidy maid uniform, she resolutely held an upright posture. Those who are servants must never fail to remain calm and collected. These were the words of the mentor who taught Frederica the basics of being a servant. Due to a particular reason, the relationship with that mentor wasn't very agreeable, but the words were without fault, and she took them to heart. Frederica, who always tried to maintain a calm, collected attitude, nevertheless now was neither calm nor collected, but helplessly staring in amazement. The cause was, I'm sorry, but would you mind if I asked you to repeat that, please? Of course. I received the recent recruiting announcement from the mansion, and I've come to offer my services. I'm Petra Leti. I'm looking forward to working with you. The location was Roswell Manor's reception room, where the two of them sat across a low table set with tea and snacks. Facing the one introducing herself, the girl called Petra, Frederica raised a slightly thick eyebrow. In front of Frederica, Petra sat with her hands clasped on her knees, awaiting an answer. As a first impression, Frederica thought she was an adorable girl. Her neck-length brown hair was tinged with red, and she had large, round eyes and a lovely face that was made for a smile. Her voice was like a fairy singing, a delight to listen to, and her cleanliness and well-chosen clothing also gave a good impression. Her mentor had also said, to avoid bringing shame upon your master, first put your appearance in order. So, based on her first impression, Petra's evaluation was close to perfect. Since she'd come in response to the recruiting, one could believe that she was ready to work as well. However, there was one big question. I'm sorry for asking repeatedly, but you do understand what the recruiting is for, yes? You're not here to play. No, I wouldn't come to the Lord's mansion to play. Well, I did, but that's a separate matter. You have been here to play. Subaru invited me. As she blushed, Petra touched a finger to her red cheeks. Even the gesture was cute. Recalling the conduct of the black-haired young man, Frederica felt Petra's response was likely true, and she covered her mouth with a hand and sighed. Petra's outlook was optimistic, and she met all the recruiting requirements. In other words, well then, you have the desire and determination to work as a maid here at the mansion of Roswell Elmathers. Isn't that so? With a serious expression, Frederica asked Petra that with a slightly hardened voice. Her gaze had a hint of intimidating intent in it. Under that hard gaze, yes, of course. I'm looking forward to working with you, Miss Frederica. Not intimidated in the slightest, Petra gave her reply with a cheerful smile. Too, the position Petra had applied for was working at the mansion as Frederica's subordinate. The call for new maids had a simple, but urgent reason behind it. In short, it was impossible for Frederica to manage the huge Roswell estate by herself. It would be one thing if this was a short-term problem, but in the long term, it was sure to fall apart somewhere. Perfection is impossible. However, one must strive for perfection. These were also her mentor's words. Frederica had taken them to heart, and while she wasn't a perfectionist, her philosophy was to always be working towards it. As a result, Frederica, whose job was management and maintenance of the mansion, was permitted a degree of discretion if she deemed it necessary. This also applied to hiring new staff, and with the sense of depending on Roswell's generosity, she had embarked on this recruitment. Given the urgency of the situation, the recruiting was limited to the nearby village of Erlam. Regardless, because of the events that had just occurred, the village's view of the mansion had greatly improved from what Frederica remembered. There weren't many young ladies, but hopes were still high. That was Frederica's assessment. So, when only a single applicant responded, and that one a girl 12 years of age, it seemed like a serious mistake. Petra, sitting on the sofa, looked up at Frederica while waiting for her response. But unable to completely hide her nervousness, she had been raising and lowering her teacup and had repeatedly checked on Frederica's expression with quick glances. For a 12-year-old, she seemed almost too clever for her age. Of course, Petra understood that even if she did meet all the recruiting requirements, it wasn't an easy position to be hired for. Given that she had applied anyways, there was no room to question her determination. While that's true, what we really need is someone who can start helping right away. Looking frustrated, Frederica closed her eyes. For the current recruitment, if they had time to spare for training a new maid, Petra would certainly have been hired. However, under the current conditions, they couldn't spare the time it would take to educate Petra in the basics of being a maid. Making Frederica spend time on training would negate the entire point of hiring help. So, what do you think? As Frederica thought about this and that, Petra hesitantly spoke to her. Despite having her heart shaken by the pleading look of an apprehensive girl, Frederica came to the only conclusion she could. Overlooking her for the current hiring, she would gently send Petra home, without hurting her feelings. Yes, indeed. Firstly, then, what can you do? And perhaps you could also describe to me how that will be helpful as a servant of the household. Indeed, as I mentioned earlier, this isn't my first time in the mansion. Because of that, I'm familiar with most of the rooms in the mansion. You know where to find most of the rooms in the mansion? Yes, when I was here before, I had a quick tour, so I'm fairly confident. The attempt to convince Petra to give up due to lack of ability was blown off course by an unexpected response. One could be forgiven for wondering if that statement wasn't an exaggeration or simply idle talk, but the eyes of the girl looking at Frederica were clear. She didn't want to think that, at her age, this girl could lie as easily as she could breathe. Perhaps it was true then. But you say you've had a tour of the mansion. Such opportunities should be very rare. How did you happen to? Subaru invited us, so my friends and I from the village were playing tag with him in the mansion. I see, a game of tag what? You played tag here in this mansion? For a moment, Frederica looked upwards in shock at what she had just heard. At that response, Petra's eyes opened wide, and she touched a finger to the cheek of her worried face. Well, that's one of Subaru's strange but fun points, so don't scold him too much. Please. You are quite supportive of him, aren't you? Given your difference in age, I would think having you say, "Don't scold him too much" would be a bit embarrassing for him. He did make sure to get permission from Lord Roswell first. I can believe that, both of the one that suggested it and the one that permitted it. After Petra's statement, Frederica sagged as she thought of the two people in question. Their clownish-looking lord would likely have been amused and supported the black-haired young man's suggestion. To be honest, I'm not quite sure what to make of Master Subaru either. If you've only heard the stories about him, he seems to have the achievements of a wise man, and yet. However, if Subaru heard himself called something like a wise man, he'd deny it strenuously. Frederica and Subaru had only known each other for about a day, but she had concluded he had a personality like frivolity, bluster, keen wit, and many other things mixed together and exploded. Even then, playing tag. Well then, on to the next topic. I'm quite good at sewing too. Originally, I was hoping for a job making clothing, so I can mend clothing very well. Also, I've just started learning to cook, but Mother said she hasn't got anything left to teach me. Such an industrious child. Incidentally, when did you begin to study cooking? It was after the incident with the witch beasts in the forest, so about a month and a half ago. The way she was able to respond quickly and clearly was partly due to her answers being prepared, but also showed that she could think quickly. A grasp of the mansion's interior and capable of sewing and cooking. The ability to speak confidently also showed her suitability as a servant was exceptionally high. If she could take back what she'd said, well, it was only within her own mind, but if she was allowed to take back what she'd said, she wanted to hire Petra so badly she could taste it. But there was a reason that Frederica couldn't just jump to that conclusion. And it was something that was even more important than ability for working at the Roswell estate. That was, I can see your strengths now. If I'm being honest, I did not intend to hire you, due to your age. I suppose it can't be helped that you would think that. But if so? After the first part of Frederica's statement, Petra's wry smile changed into a sparkle in her eyes. The conversation was going in Petra's favor now. It wasn't unreasonable for her to be hopeful. It's just a bit too soon to celebrate, however. The situation wasn't quite simple enough for Petra to get her wish just yet. Supposing, then, that you achieved your goal, you would be spending your time here in this mansion. Here, in this household involved in the royal selection, a serious affair concerning all of the kingdom of Lugunica. Your actions reflect on the master, your words reflect on the master, and the way you live reflects on the master. You do understand this, then. It wasn't intended to be threatening. It was the truth, pure and simple. If Petra were to work as a maid at this mansion, none of her behavior could be allowed to use her youth as an excuse. Her understanding of that fact and determination to continue despite it were necessary. However, Petra responded, "The person I care about is too special for me to get cold feet and give up, so I can't stop now." Smiling faintly, Frederica closed her eyes at the words of a young girl whose cheeks were dyed with her affection. It wasn't a method for making up one's mind that she could approve of, but Frederica was very familiar with another girl who had made up her mind the same way that Petra was now. Well then, there's nothing more to be said about that. Relaxing a little, Frederica said that with an odd sense of satisfaction. Hearing that, Petra's face went blank for just a moment, and then her face lit up. "Thank you very much, Miss Frederica. Make no mistake, my guidance will be very strict. Please don't expect that I will allow my personal feelings to affect my judgment, or that I will go easy on you. Of course. Also, I have one last, very important thing to tell you." Holding up a finger, Frederica announced this to Petra with a strict tone of voice. At the chance in atmosphere, Petra straightened her back and held her breath in preparation. Frederica spoke to the earnest girl. "From now on, make sure to call me Sister Frederica. In this mansion, it's custom, the rule for senior maids and junior maids." At Frederica's words, Petra opened her round eyes wide and paused. She paused, and then immediately, with a face like a flower blooming, "Yes, Sister Frederica." As Petra called her that without hesitation, Frederica nodded in satisfaction. The woman with long brown hair was, of course, the person who had left such a clear mark on Petra's features. "Oh, I do hope my child doesn't cause you any trouble at the mansion." Holding a hand to her cheek, the one taking a worried breath was Petra's mother, the Leite household that had welcomed her. This was Petra's home in the village, and Frederica was chatting with the girl's mother. As part of taking on Petra as a maid at the mansion, she wanted to speak with her parents. Not to make too much of a problem of that fact that she was 12 years of age, but there were certain forms to be observed. That was Frederica's feeling on the matter, but Petra's mother was more than a little unsettled. "But you're so kind, Miss Frederica. It sets my heart at ease. Please take care of my Petra for me." "Oh no, thank you. We're so glad that she's coming to work with us." Aside from her, no one responded to the recruiting announcement, so honestly, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Yes, that's right." With Petra properly handed over to her care, Frederica expressed her relief and let slip only a single idle complaint. Petra's mother's response to that was a bit unexpected, almost as though she was hiding something important. "Is there something?" Actually, about the recruitment, Petra pleaded so much with the other village girls that they decided against applying for the job. With a tone of voice wasn't so much that of someone admitting it from a sense of guilt, but more someone that was proud of her daughter's abilities, Petra's mother revealed the behind-the-scenes truth of this event. When Frederica opened her eyes wide at that, Petra's mother gave her a mischievous wink. "Our girl has a promising future, don't you think?" Yes, indeed. In the back of Frederica's mind, she was reminded of the phrase, like mother, like daughter. With her adorable face and very deft maneuvering, indeed, her future looked bright. Well, now I'm really looking forward to her training. Frederica let out a sigh of admiration that conveyed the hope in her heart. Hopefully, she would be able to see the day that these expectations and hopes began to bloom. "Please allow me to look forward to that, Lady Amelia." Those words, whispered without opening her lips, didn't reach anyone's ears and ever so quietly vanished away. The end.